I'm going to focus on the sort of the wind up to this passage, the last part of chapter 7. Starting with verse 24. So then, anyone who hears these words of mine, and these words of mine refers to what Jesus has been saying in chapter 5 and chapter 6 and chapter 7 as it appears in Matthew. He's talking about this whole body of teaching. He says, anyone who hears these words of mine and obeys them is like a wise man who built his house on rock. The rain poured down, the rivers flooded over, and the wind blew hard against that house, but it did not fall because it was built on rock. But anyone who hears these words of mine and does not obey them is like a foolish man. See the contrast between wise and foolish? Who built his house on sand. The rain poured down, the rivers flooded over, the wind blew against the house, and it fell. And what a terrible fall that was. So Jesus regards his teaching as leading us to wisdom. And this teaching, this particular passage in Matthew, is the longest extended passage of Jesus' teaching that we have recorded in any of the Gospels. So it behooves us there to pay attention to wisdom. Note that in this passage, Jesus doesn't say, the people that listen to my preaching. He says, the people that hear it and follow it, who hear it and obey it, are the wise people. I'll read another little passage here from Dr. Daniel's book, which he emphasizes the distinction. Excuse me here. He says, I alluded to this earlier, but I must repeat it for clarification. Godliness is often myopically, meaning short-sightedly, minimized to mean morality. Some Christian contexts look for and demand that Christians live right. However, Jesus' life teaches us that living right is not just about moral excellence. It also includes wise decision making. Godliness is always undergirded by wisdom, not postured in competition against it. It includes morality, but it is more than morality. It is more than living right. It is living wisely. I'll give a couple of illustrations of that as it appears in the, you have to excuse me a minute. Let's take a look at Proverbs. Proverbs 18. I should add a marker in here, but I don't. Now, this particular translation that I have makes Proverbs kind of fun. Sometimes the language that we're accustomed to in Proverbs seems a little bit obscure. Here's some advice in Proverbs 18:20. It says, you will have to live with the consequences of everything you say. What you say can preserve life or destroy it, so you must accept the consequences of your words. And that's a heavy burden. Jesus also warns people that says, whatever you say in secret will be shouted from the housetops. Jesus is very familiar with the book of Proverbs, you can tell. Let's take a look at Proverbs 26. I'm reading verses 24 to 26. A hypocrite, this one to me is very, very contemporary. Sounds like our political world to me. It says, a hypocrite hides hate behind flattering words. They may sound fine, but don't believe him. because his heart is filled to the brim with hate. He may disguise his hatred, but everyone will see the evil things he does. I'm not talking about anybody, I'm just talking about what I'm talking about. Wisdom is not something that comes to us quickly. In fact, it didn't come to Jesus quickly. If we take a look at Luke, at the end of the second chapter, after Jesus, at age 12, got separated from his family and they found him in the temple. You remember that story? It says, Jesus went back with them, his parents, to Nazareth, where he was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. Jesus grew both in body and in wisdom, gaining favor with God and people. So not even Jesus got his wisdom apart from experience, apparently. Apparently it takes time. I'd like to think of myself as wiser than I was a decade or two back. My wife might disagree with that. But she was out there this morning. She ordered me. My wife, you understand, is a pretty gentle person. She doesn't really order me around very much. But I was out shoveling snow this morning, and she says, "Alan, stop it." So she took over the shoveling and the de-icing herself. She wasn't doing quite as fast as I thought she should, but I didn't say anything about it. Sometimes you gotta take your win and go. Her reason for doing that was because the doctor told me I should confine myself to moderate exercise for the next month or so. I can't do extreme things. So, anyway, so I guess that was wise of me to pay attention to what she said. Well, never know what the consequences might have been. So. Let's take a look at James 3, because this is a New Testament writer now talking to us about wisdom. And James is referring to two kinds of wisdom. This is in chapter 3. And somehow I got over into Peter. Here we go. Starting with verse 13. Now, James just got through talking about the tongue and how it's unbridled and dangerous, which echoes the passage that we read in Proverbs just a minute ago about having to face the consequences from whatever comes out of your mouth. But here's one. Are there any of you who are wise and understanding? You are to prove it by your good life, your good deeds, performed with humility and wisdom. But if in your heart you are jealous, bitter, and selfish, don't sin against the truth by boasting of your wisdom. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven. It belongs to the world. It is unspiritual and demonic. Where there is jealousy and selfishness, there is also disorder and every kind of evil. But the wisdom from above is pure, first of all. It is also peaceful, gentle, and friendly. It is full of compassion and produces a harvest of good deeds. It is free from prejudice and hypocrisy. And goodness is the harvest that is produced from the seeds that peacemakers plant in peace. James is probably addressing a church that was having some conflict in it. But notice the terms that he uses for heavenly wisdom. He says peaceful, gentle, friendly, full of compassion, free from prejudice and hypocrisy. Now, we talked a bit about hypocrisy a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about truth and the importance of truthfulness in our conversation. being truthful with ourselves, being truthful with God, and sometimes awkwardly being truthful with our brothers and sisters. So you can see how these things are linked and connected, which is why I think that the author put this chapter in this order. He started with love and with truth and with grace, and then gets around to the wisdom. Wisdom can't be without those other things. It's not wisdom, not godly wisdom, at least. Um, I want to give a minute for anybody who has any questions or responses to anything in this material. Anything I say? Okay. I could. No, I think in this context, the peace has to do with peace within the community of believers. And I say that because a whole lot of Proverbs talk about the smart way to avoid conflict or how to deal with conflict. I don't want to be too flippant here, especially having made a joke at my wife's expense. But there's a proverb that says it's better to live out in the desert than to share a home with a nagging wife. It's okay, you can laugh about that. And there are proverbs that say, a fool is always trying to start a fight. Wise people figure out how to avoid one. I think it has to do with social conflict. I don't think it necessarily reflects a question of foreign policy or anything like that. Although clearly I don't think there's any way to argue that a Christian society is a warlike society fundamentally. But I think the peace that James is referring to here is peace within the church. He talks about, the tongue and how much damage it causes. I think he's thinking of specific cases in a Christian church where somebody's mouth created a lot of problems. So, and by the way, am I speaking loud enough? Can people hear me? Okay, good. That's fine. Anything else? Any other questions? We got a few minutes left. Actually, we got quite a few minutes left. I think I zipped through this because I was talking too fast or something. I don't know. I would, there's more. I can share you a little more from the book, since not all of you have the copy of the book. This is an interesting observation that he makes. He says, listening is deceptive. Hearing a motivational speech will only incite potential within you, not production. You may think things will change if you listen without acting, but they won't. And that gets back to the Psalm 1 citation. It says that what a person does will prosper, not what they hear, not what they imagine. That wisdom is the point at which our spiritual maturity engages with the world around us. You detect wisdom in the way that people act and how they prioritize things, which affects how they act. I spoke at some length a couple of weeks ago about, when he's talking about truth, about how much of our environment is sending us messages all the time, which are kind of deceptive. We talked about how the original problem of human experience is based on deception. The serpent deceives Eve, misleads her. And yet we get messages by the ton, figuratively speaking. I haven't actually weighed any of them, but telling us that we will buy this thing or look this way or whatever, our lives will be better. And at its root, it's the same argument that the serpent made to Eve. It says, you won't really die. You're just going to understand things more. You'll be smarter if you do this. It turned out to be a devastating lie. So wisdom is reflected in our behavior as we engage with people, which is why so much of Jesus' teaching in Matthew is about how we behave with other people. I'll read you a few examples here. It says, you cannot be a slave of two masters. You will hate one and love the other, or you will be loyal to one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. It says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. They love to stand up and pray in the houses of worship and on the street corners so that everyone will see them. I assure you, they have already been paid in full. But when you pray, go to your room, close the door, pray to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what you say, what you do in private, will reward you. If you forgive others the wrongs they have done to you, that's an engagement with other people, your Father in heaven will also forgive you. But if you do not, here's the scary part, if you do not forgive others, then your Father will not forgive the wrongs that you have done. And these are the things at the end of this whole presentation. Jesus says, wise people hear and obey what I've just told you. That's what he says. You have heard that it was said, love your friends, hate your enemies. But now I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you so that you may become the children of your Father in heaven. That is to say, to be wise. He makes his sun to shine on bad and good people alike and gives rain to those who do good and to those who do evil. Why should God reward you if you love only the people who love you? Even the tax collectors do that. And if you speak only to your friends, have you done anything out of the ordinary? Even the pagans do that. You must be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. You have heard that people were told in the past, do not commit murder. Anyone who does will be brought to trial. But now I tell you, if you are angry with your brother, you will be brought to trial. If you call your brother good for nothing, you will be brought before the council. And if you call your brother a worthless fool, you will be in danger of going to the fires of hell. Well, that's scary. As often as I've been angry with people, I'm scared. So if you are about to offer your gift to God at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. Go at once, make peace with your brother, and then come back and offer your gift to God. Now, when I was growing up, there was always a communion time, which is always once a month. It was a Baptist church. There was always this idea that, well, before you take communion, you should forgive, based on this passage, you should forgive anyone else that you've got a grievance against. And that was thought to be an application of this passage. However, if you look carefully at the passage, that's not what it says. He says, if someone's got a gripe with you, if you're the one who needs to be forgiven, he says, make that right. Now, fortunately, if you're clueless like me, I'm not aware of anyone getting really mad at me. So I don't have to do that work until it shows up. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which it does say that in the law. But now I tell you, do not take revenge on someone who wrongs you. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, let him slap your left cheek too. It's a pretty high standard, and it doesn't make any sense at all unless you accept this notion of a wisdom that comes from God, a different way of relating to the world, a different way of thinking about the world and perceiving the world that transcends what normal people do, what sensible people seems like to do. You slap me, I punch you back. All right? Yes, ma'am. Okay, let me sum up the question. Okay, Pop. Yeah. Okay, let me summarize what you said for the sake of people who might not have been able to hear you. You had a situation where at work you were giving some colleagues a gift, but one colleague, one person in the work didn't get a gift from you. And it wasn't because you resented that person at all or had a problem with them. You weren't trying to make a statement of any kind. It was just the relationship wasn't that way. And I think we all understand that. It's always difficult to understand so what the expectations are. Around Christmas time, um, we always get a few extra gifts, just small things, because we never know when someone's going to ambush us with a gift. And we feel like we're obligated. If they give me a gift, I got to give you something back. Now, that's not really how grace works, as we talked about last week. It isn't necessarily transactional or have to be reciprocal, but you were in the situation then later in this week where there was another similar situation at work, and you were the person that didn't get the gift, and you're wondering if God is trying to tell you something. Is that a fair summation of what you said? Yeah. Well, I'll leave that. The question about whether God is going to trying to tell you something, I would say, pray about that and listen to what God says. I wouldn't see that necessarily as the case of God paying you back. Sometimes the nature of grace is that sometimes some people receive grace and other people don't at any particular time. You know, right? I mean, if you hope that the person didn't get the gift from you, doesn't take it as an offense or as an insult, there's no reason for you to turn around and feel insulted if the situation happens to you. I mean, just to be consistent, it's the way it is. It is so awkward sometimes. to know how to deal with grace, the unexpected gift from someone, and you have nothing to give back. It doesn't feel comfortable. And then we're always, I think, wondering if, like me, I don't wonder much. Like I said, I'm clueless. But sometimes something happens, and someone says something to me or a situation, and then an hour later, it's like, wait a minute, what did that mean? Is anybody else like that? No, nobody's like that. Yeah, okay. And then I want, Jesus, this person have a problem with me? Have I offended this person? You know, Jesus would tell us that being truthful is the best way to know whether somebody's got a problem with us. And if someone has a problem with us, as this passage that I just read that says, we should try to get that fixed. We should try to make peace with a person who resents us for some reason. Again, if you're like me, you're clueless. Life is a lot easier. Things fly by me all the time, and I don't get it. But yes, ma'am. That's the way we think. Yeah. This is true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let, yeah. Yeah. Okay, if I can sum up, because not everybody can probably hear what you're saying. I'll just sum it up. I won't do justice to it. I'll just sum it up. Your point is that it isn't always, we don't always have all the information. We don't really know. And the best you can do, you think, is go ahead and try to move ahead, try to do right by people, and let God take care of the rest. Is that a fair summation? Okay. Anybody else? Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Joe's point is that in order to be peacemakers, we have to be kind of aggressive about it sometimes, to be honest with people. Are you offended with me? It's fair. It's fair to make that. It's fair to ask that question. Are we okay? It's fair to ask that question. He pointed out how about, I haven't seen Joe drive, but he says he makes people mad all the time when he's driving. Oh, that's you. Okay. That guy on my bumper. I know who that is now. Okay. Bye. I've been wondering about that. Okay. Dorisa. Whoa, what about jealousy? Okay, and that was actually one of the passages that we read from Proverbs, wasn't it? About people's hypocrisy and so forth and so. They talk nice, but there's actually other motivations. Yeah, that is not wise to be that way. Just so you understand, that's what Jesus said is foolishness. Now, when you're the target of that kind of foolishness, it's not comfortable. But just to be clear, what wisdom is about making peace. And forgiveness, yeah, that's another part of why we read that passage in when Jesus said, if you forgive others, God forgives you. If you don't forgive others, yeah, okay. We're just about. Oh yes, ma'am. Okay. You're talking about the burden of unforgiveness. Yeah. Okay. That was Brenda talking there. For those who didn't get it, I see that we're out of time. Uh, And several of you came in. I think I do want to mention this. Since last week, I did this thing about my hand acting funny. I had a stroke this weekend, which is what that was. I didn't know that. And I am out of the hospital and I'm here. Um, Things are a little bit weak and slow on the left side of my arm and leg, but the doctor thinks I'll make a full recovery. So I'm grateful for that. Uh, and let's close in prayer. Father in heaven, give us wisdom. Help us to learn to be more and more like you. Set aside the foolishness, the selfishness, the fear, the susceptibility to being deceived. And let us see the truth and the wisdom that you have for us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.